All right, happy Wednesday, seniors. Today I'm just going to talk a little bit about Act 5 of Othello. This play kind of ends in a hot mess sort of style, but there is justice in the end, which is nice. Iago is finally brought to justice, but a lot of people die throughout this process, and it's just very messy. So in the beginning of Act 5, in scene 1 of Act 5, Iago and Rodrigo are waiting outside of where they know that Cassio is dining, and they're preparing to ambush him at night. And kill him. Remember, they made this plan that Rodrigo, if he wanted to be with Desdemona, needed to kill Cassio, which logically doesn't make a lot of sense, but because Iago is such a manipulative person and he's so good at kind of convincing people of his lies, he was able to convince Rodrigo that he needed to kill Cassio if he ever thought that he would have any hope of being with Desdemona. And Rodrigo believed him. So Cassio comes out of the restaurant, and he's heading home, and Rodrigo kind of makes a jab at him with his sword, but Rodrigo is certainly not a soldier by any means. He's basically just like a upper class man who has no training in anything. He just kind of relies on his wealth to get by. So he does not hit his mark. He misses Cassio and kind of hardly does anything. And so Cassio is kind of like, oh, what's this? Like, what's going on? He's super confused. It's dark. He doesn't really know what's happening. He just knows that there's two figures there, and he kind of jabs back, and him and Rodrigo get into a little scuffle. And in the midst of this, Iago kind of sneaks around and ends up slicing Cassio in the leg, which obviously wounds him pretty bad, and would end up kind of disabling him for the rest of his life, we find out. But Iago kind of slices Cassio's leg, so he kind of falls and he's in pain, and then Iago's like, oh, I'm in a bad situation here, we need to figure this out, and so he kills Rodrigo, and then as people arrive, when they hear Cassio's cries, Iago pretends that he's just stumbled on the scene, and oh, Rodrigo killed Cassio, and we don't know why, and da-da-da, and it's kind of a hot mess, and Iago kind of plants everything on Rodrigo, and then this way, because Rodrigo's dead and because Rodrigo is the villain in blame, no one's going to kind of get suspicious of any of Iago's behavior or Iago's involvement in this, and so Iago can keep all the jewels and all the money that he has stolen from Rodrigo. Remember, he stole a lot of like jewelry and gifts that Rodrigo gave him, and that Rodrigo said he should give to Desdemona, and Iago ended up just keeping them, and now he gets to keep those as well. Because Rodrigo is dead, he's out of the picture. Iago is pretty sure that Cassio is dead, and so he kind of like leaves that be. And then Othello comes on the scene, and Iago's like, oh, I'm your honest good friend. Like, look, Cassio's finally dead. This is exactly what we wanted. And Othello's like, yes, good. Everything's happening. Cassio's dead. Now I need to go to like take care of Desdemona. And so Othello leaves while the other guys are kind of taking care of Cassio. Cassio's not dead, but Othello thinks that he is, and Iago's kind of pretty sure, hopefully, that he is. So that's kind of what's happening here. Then we switch to scene 2, in which case, sorry, I just got an email that popped out on my phone, and so I got distracted. Okay, scene 2, Othello shows up in Desdemona's bedchamber, where she's kind of sleeping, and she kind of wakes up, and she's like, oh, what's going on? Like, come to bed, da-da-da. They're in a weird place, and she's just kind of trying to play peacekeeper here and kind of, like, mend their relationship, and Othello is being really cryptic, and he says, you know, have you said all your confessions? Have you said all your prayers? Is everything right with you and the Lord? And she's like, yeah, what's going on? And he's like, well, I'm going to kill you. And he straight up tells her, like, I'm here to murder you. That is my plan. You have to die now, and I just want to make sure you're all in good standing with the Lord so you don't go to hell when I murder you. And so, you know, take that as you will. And Desdemona is really stressed, and she tries to kind of talk him out of it, and she tries to convince him, like, I've never cheated on you, I've been loyal to you, I'm faithful to you, I love you. And Othello is just not hearing it. He's being really verbally abusive to Desdemona, kind of just cutting her down, calling her all these horrible slanderous names. And then finally he smothers her with a pillow. And as he is smothering her, Emilia kind of runs in because she's heard about everything crazy that happened back in scene 1. She and Bianca had stumbled upon the murder. They kind of figured out everything that happened, and Iago is kind of trying to blame it on Bianca, but Emilia is kind of putting the pieces together, and she's kind of freaking out because she's like, Othello needs to know this. Othello, like, my husband has tricked him. He's going to do something crazy, da-da-da. So Emilia runs up to Desdemona's bedchambers, and she's crying out for Desdemona, and Othello answers the door, and Emilia's kind of like, what's going on in here, da-da-da, like, you need to know something, like, your wife hasn't been unfaithful to you, my husband was tricking you, he was being manipulative, Cassio's still alive, all that, like, she just kind of tells him what's going on, because she doesn't yet know that Othello's bad. Right now, she's like, oh, you've just been tricked, I want to help you, kind of, but then she hears Desdemona kind of moaning from inside the bedchambers, and she goes in, and, she kind of asks Desdemona, who's done this to you? And Desdemona just says, no one, it was just myself. So even in her death, Desdemona sort of defends Othello. She stays true to what would be expected of a wife. And this is really a good example of abusive relationships. Shakespeare does a really good job of demonstrating that even in those final moments, even when it comes down to death, a lot of the times if you are a victim of an abusive relationship, you're still going to kind of stand up for and defend your abuser because you're kind of locked in this really manipulative cycle that is really hard for a victim to overcome. Because the abuser has so much power over them. And so even in her final death moments, Desdemona still kind of defends Othello and lies and says, no one killed me, I did this to myself. And Emilia's suspicious. And then Othello says what I believe is probably the most suspicious thing ever. He says, oh, you heard her, it wasn't me. And she's like, okay, yes, you're right. She said that it wasn't you. But Emilia kind of, like any person could figure out if you walk into a room where there's two people and one of them is dead and the other one is like, I don't know, it wasn't me. Obviously that person is involved. So Emilia's no dummy. So she is kind of putting the pieces all together and kind of talking to Othello, and then she's kind of like getting him to talk about what happened, and Othello eventually admits that he did kill her, but it was because, she was cheating on me and she was all these things and she needed to die. I viewed it as a sacrifice, da-da-da. And Emilia is like, no, she was never cheating on you. She was super faithful to you, even when I told her she shouldn't be because I hate you. Like, Emilia just kind of goes off on Othello, defending Desdemona. And then Emilia explains everything from the handkerchief to Cassio's involvement to Iago's involvement, how everything kind of led together and how Iago ended up manipulating all of them. And then now because of this, Othello has killed his own wife. So Othello's devastated. And then around this same time, all of the other people who were involved in the fight in scene 1 kind of show up. So we have some of the upper soldiers, and then we have Cassio on a stretcher. He's super wounded, but he's alive and he's going to live. And we have Iago. And Iago kind of overhears Emilia confessing all of this, telling everyone what's happened, telling Othello about how Iago was the manipulative one and how, Desdemona was nothing but pure and good and Cassio is not guilty of anything. And so Iago freaks out in violence. He calls Emilia a bunch of slanderous names, and then he tries to kill her and he stabs her and basically mortally wounds her. So Emilia does die later on, but she doesn't die right away. And everyone sees that Iago tried to kill his wife, and so obviously right then and there, in his kind of anger and in his outburst, that kind of is what ends up criminalizing Iago, and everyone else then believes Emilia's story because they can see very clearly right in front of them that Iago is not trustworthy. He just tried to kill his wife, which no good, unhonorable man would do. And so kind of the guards and the soldiers put 2 and 2 together and figure everything out. And they're like, okay, we figured out what happened. We know what's going on here. Iago, we are going to torture you for as long as we can to the point of death without killing you. Othello, you may no longer be in charge. Cassio is going to take your position. And that's just how everybody's going to be. And so Othello is still really devastated. He's still reeling from the news that he killed his wife for absolutely no reason and that he was such a sucker, basically, to Iago's little plan. So in his grief and in his anger in that moment, he ends up killing himself and laying next to Desdemona. And so as a result, at the end of this, we have Othello has died, Desdemona has died, Rodrigo has died, and Emilia has died. Iago has been captured, and he is going to spend the rest of his days being tortured. And Cassio, when he heals, he will be kind of forever wounded. I don't necessarily know how a sword wound would impact your leg, but I'm going to guess you'd have like a really bad limp and it would limit your mobility. But he gets to be the general. He's in charge now. So that's good. And that's basically how the play wraps up. So we see this horrible, tragic story. This is a Shakespearean tragedy, in which case jealousy and envy kind of play a huge role in breaking up the trust between these people. Iago becomes this really manipulative person. Everyone falls for it. And because of these trust issues and because of the problem of jealousy, all these people die. And so one of Shakespeare's main points that he's making with this play, obviously, is about jealousy. That would be the main overarching point, is jealousy and trust, the relationship they have with each other, just making a point about, how easily we can be manipulated into believing things and how easily we're willing to kind of get jealous and, stop trusting our partners or our friends and different things like that. And so that's Shakespeare's main point. That's one of the main themes with this entire play. One of the other themes is about abusive relationships. Shakespeare definitely goes out of his way to demonstrate what an abusive marriage looks like, what it can, how it can come around, what it looks like to be the victim in that situation and the abuser. He does a good job of pointing out the really complicated fact that sometimes abusers are not super obvious to average people. Othello was really highly respected and people really loved him and valued him, and no one really would have thought that he would be that kind of person. But he was so, like, it hardly took anything for him to be so verbally abusive and so physically abusive to Desdemona, just a little bit of jealousy. And then, suddenly he's this horrible husband. And so that is kind of a really good demonstration of abusive relationships, just in that a lot of the times we as outside, third-party people aren't going to be aware of what's happening because abusers are so quick to, they just are good at kind of masking what they're doing. So that's where it's really important, obviously, when a victim of something like this comes forward, especially those of you who had me last semester, this is something we talked about, how important it is to kind of listen to the victim, hear what she has to say, and believe her or him, depending on whatever the situation is. In this situation, it's a female who's being abused, but it goes both ways, where hearing a victim is most important in stopping abusive relationships, and that is something that Shakespeare kind of points out is the way that abusers can kind of silence their victims. And then he also... using Amelia and using her specifically, but also kind of Bianca, points out like the different roles that women can play in relationships and kind of having a voice. And at the end of the day, the hero in this story is a woman. Amelia is kind of the one who sets the record straight. She's the one who resolves everything and brings about justice, which is super exciting because at the time that this would have been written, women, remember, still had absolutely no rights and no value in society. So the way that Shakespeare portrays women, personally, I've always really thought was kind of very progressive and very, very cool. I'm a big fan. I'm kind of a nerd about that. My whole senior thesis for my English side of my major was about Shakespearean demonstrations of women, so I could go off on that forever. But yeah, basically those are kind of some of the main themes that this play talks about. So what you guys are going to have to do is write a paper kind of going over one of the themes and explaining it. This is just a very classic, this is a literary analysis style paper that you guys have done many times throughout your high school career. This is your very last paper for my class, and this is pretty much going to be the last thing that we do in this class. We'll have one more final project, and then that's it. So make sure that you are thinking about the themes, thinking about the way that Shakespeare demonstrates them. SparkNotes is truly a really good resource. I know a lot of the times people use it to cheat. You can't really cheat using No Fear Shakespeare because you're still reading the play, so I don't really mind if you are using it. Like I gave you the resource. You should be using No Fear Shakespeare. But they do a really good job examining the different themes and finding examples of it throughout the play. And so I would encourage you to look through that site, explore it a little bit, read into the different themes. If you have any questions, let me know about it. I want you to be thinking about, abusive relationships, the cycles of relationships, Shakespearean displays of men and women, especially in power positions, and then the main theme, which would be jealousy and trust and kind of like the nuances that exist within that. So be thinking about that. Friday, I will post your final paper assignment, and then you will have about a week to get it done, get it in, and that'll bring us to about May 15th. And then you would only have 1 week left anyway, so we are going to do one final project that is, I promise, going to be really fun and really easy. And yeah, that is it. So, okay, bye.